The alarm screamed across New Meridian Colony just after midnight, and Marcus Chen jerked awake from another nightmare about his dead family. He pulled on his boots and jacket while the emergency channel crackled to life on his wrist device, telling him a ship had crashed 3 miles outside the settlement walls. Marcus grabbed his rescue kit and headed for the garage where his team was already gathering Sarah. His second-in-command looked worried as she pulled up the scanner data showing them what they were dealing with. The ship was Valrine design, and that made everyone nervous because the Valrine were known across the galaxy as fierce warriors who did not appreciate help from humans. Marcus told his team they were going anyway, because that was what humans did when someone was hurt and needed help, even if that someone might shoot them for trying. The crash site was ugly, with twisted metals scattered across the rocky ground and smoke still rising from the hull. Breach Marcus approached, carefully calling out in standard galactic trade language that they were there to help and meant no harm. No response came back, so he climbed through the torn opening with Sarah right behind him, and what they found inside made his stomach turn. Female Valrine lay dying in the pilot seat, with burns covering most of her scaled body and one wing bent at an impossible angle. But what made Marcus freeze was the small child clutched in her arms, barely old enough to walk, with wide, terrified eyes staring up at the strange humans. The mother looked at Marcus and somehow found the strength to speak in broken human language that she must have learned somewhere in her travels. She said please, and then said take her, and then said keep her. From them, with such desperation that Marcus felt it like a punch to his chest, Sarah was scanning the child, checking for injuries, while Marcus knelt beside the dying mother and promised he would keep the little one safe. The Valrine woman smiled. Then, and it was the saddest thing Marcus had ever seen, as the light faded from her eyes and her hand went limp, still reaching toward her daughter. Child made a sound then that no species could mistake for anything but grief as she realized her mother was gone forever. Marcus did something he had not done in 3 years since his own daughter died, and he reached out and gathered the alien child into his arms. She was warm and shaking and covered in small, soft scales that felt like smooth leather under his hands. Sarah said they needed to get back to the colony before the ship exploded completely, and Marcus nodded, carrying the child as carefully as he could. The little Valrine buried her face against his chest and made small chirping sounds that he somehow understood meant she was crying back. At the colony, the council met immediately, and the arguments started before Marcus even sat down. Council leader James said they could not keep an alien child because they did not know Valrine biology or customs or dietary needs. Dr. Yuki said she could figure out the medical requirements, but they should contact the Valrine government to find the child's family. Marcus said no, with such force that everyone stopped talking and stared at him. He told them about the mother's last words about keeping the child from them, and how those burns on her body were not from the crash but from torture that had healed badly over time. He said that mother died escaping something, and he would not send this child back into whatever hell she ran from, James said. Marcus was letting his emotions cloud his judgment because of his own lost daughter, but Marcus did not care if that was true. He said maybe his emotions were exactly what made him see clearly that this was a child who needed protection, and humans were supposed to be good at that. The council argued for another hour, but finally agreed to let Marcus foster the child temporarily while they investigated the situation. Marcus carried the sleeping child to his empty house that had been too quiet for too long. He set up his old daughter's room, which he had not entered in years, and it hurt, but also felt right. Somehow the little Valrine woke up and looked around confused and scared, until she saw Marcus, and then she reached for him like he was the only safe thing in a dangerous universe. He sat on the floor with her and tried to communicate using gestures and simple words. She pointed at herself and made a sound that he tried to copy until she nodded, and he thought maybe her name was Lyce. Marcus pointed at himself and said his name slowly, and she tried to repeat it, but it came out strange through her different mouth shape. They sat together in the quiet house while outside the colony walls the night sky was full of stars that humans had only recently learned to reach. Marcus did not know Valrine customs or biology, and he definitely did not know how to raise an alien child, but he knew how to be gentle and patient and how to show someone they were safeless. Fell asleep again with her small hand wrapped around his finger, and Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. that had been frozen since his family died, he carried her to the bed and tucked her in. Sat in the chair by the door watching her breathe. The house felt less empty with another living being inside it, and Marcus thought maybe he could do this maybe. He could give this child the safety her mother died trying to find he was wrong about. That because at dawn the proximity alarms went off again this time, it was not a small damaged ship, but a massive Valrine warship dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the colony. Sierra called him with panic in her voice, saying, the Volreen were hailing them and demanding to speak with whoever took their property. Marcus looked at Lisa's still sleeping peacefully in the bed, and his jaw tightened with determination. He told Sarah he was coming, and to tell the Volreen he would speak with them, but he thought to himself that he had already lost one daughter and he would walk through fire before he let anyone take this one. The warship hung in the sky above New Meridian like a dark promise, and Marcus knew the real fight was about to begin. He just hoped humanity's stubborn refusal to abandon the helpless would be enough to face down an empire. Part 2. The price of compassion. The Volreen commander who landed at New Meridian was everything Marcus expected, and Fira Draxler stood nearly 8 feet tall, with deep red scales and battle scars covering his arms and face.
Allied medals he wore proudly.
He brought 20 armed soldiers, who moved with the precision of warriors who had killed many times before and would do so again without hesitation. Marcus met them at the landing pad with Sarah and 3 council members, because showing fear to predators was always mistaken. Draxler looked at the humans the way someone might look at insects that were interesting but ultimately insignificant. He spoke in perfect human language, which somehow made him more threatening because it meant he had studied them enough to know their weaknesses. Commander said he was there to retrieve property that belonged to the clan of Examar, and that property was the child currently being held illegally by the human colony. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, but kept his voice calm as he asked, what kind of people called a child property? Draxithor smiled, and it was not a nice smile, as he explained that Lisa's was promised in marriage to the heir of a powerful Valrine house. Arrangement had been made when she was born, and her transport to her future husband had been interrupted by her mother's theft and subsequent death. Sarah made a disgusted sound and said the child was maybe 3 years old, and the Volreen commander nodded like this was perfectly normal. He said among his people, breeding arrangements were made early to ensure proper genetic combinations and political alliances. Marcus said that among humans such things were called child abuse and were illegal and morally disgusting. Draxler's expression hardened, and he said human morality did not apply to Valrine traditions that were thousands of years old. The commander said he would give Marcus one chance to return the child peacefully before he took her by force. Marcus looked at the armed soldiers and knew the colony could not win a fight against trained Volreen warriors, but he also knew he could not hand Lisa's over to a life of slavery dressed up as tradition. So Marcus said no, and the word hung in the air like a declaration of war. The council members behind him looked terrified, but Sarah stepped forward and stood beside him, and that made him proud of humanity's stubborn loyalty. Draxler studied Marcus for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He laughed and said he respected courage even when it was foolish. Commander said he would offer an alternative because destroying the colony would create tedious paperwork with the Galactic Council if Marcus could prove through 3 trials that he was capable of providing for and protecting a Volreen child better than her own people. Then Draxler would consider his claim. Marcus asked what would happen if he refused the trials, and Draxler said his soldiers would level the colony and take the child anyways. So Marcus accepted because it was the only choice that gave Lisa's any chance at freedom. The first trial would begin in 2 days, which gave Marcus time to prepare and to spend with Liz. Returned to his house, where Dr. Yuki was watching the little girl who had been crying since Marcus left. Liz ran to him and wrapped her small arms around his leg, and Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He picked her up and carried her to his workshop because he needed to repair some equipment and did not want to leave her. Alonelius watched him work with intense focus that surprised him for someone so young. Marcus was fixing a broken water purifier when Lisa's made a chirping sound and pointed at a part he had installed incorrectly. He looked closer and realized she was right, so he fixed it, and the machine hummed to life. Marcus stared at the child, who was now examining other devices on his workbench with obvious interest. He brought her a broken scanner that he had been meaning to fix for weeks, and showed her the parts. Lise studied it for only a few minutes before she started fitting pieces together in ways Marcus had not considered. Her small hands worked with surprising dexterity, and within an hour the scanner was functioning. Again, Marcus realized this child was not just intelligent, but had an intuitive understanding of how things worked. That was remarkable. He taught her some basic human words while they worked, and she taught him some Volrene words, and slowly they built a bridge between their languages. That night, Marcus made dinner and had to guess what Volrene children could eat safely. He tried several things before finding that Lisa's liked protein bars and dried fruit, which was not ideal, but better than nothing. She fell asleep in his arms while he sat on the couch, and Marcus realized he had not felt this peaceful in 3 years. Next day, he began preparing for the first trial, which required him to hunt and kill a Krithix using only traditional Volrene weapons. Sarah brought him information about the creature, which was basically a 6-legged predator with armored skin and venomous claws. The Volrene weapons were a curved blade and a throwing spear, neither of which Marcus had ever trained with. He practiced in the yard while Lisa's watched, and occasionally made sounds that he was learning meant she was amused. Dr. Yuki came by to check on Lisa's and ran more medical scans, trying to understand Volrene biology better. She told Marcus privately that Lisa showed signs of old injuries that had healed badly, suggesting she had been mistreated before her mother fled. That information made Marcus even more determined to win the trials, because no child should go back to people who hurt them. Though evening before the first trial, Sarah asked Marcus if he really thought he could win against Volrene warriors on their own terms. Said probably not, but he was going to try anyway, because that was what humans did when something mattered. He said humanity did not crawl up from Earth through centuries of struggle just to bow down to cruelty when it wore the mask of tradition. Sarah smiled and said that was the most human thing she had ever heard. That night, Marcus tucked Lisa's into bed, and she looked up at him with complete trust in her large eyes. She said something in Volrene that he did not fully understand, but the meaning was clear. She was calling him father. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he smoothed the soft scales on her head and promised he would not let anyone take her away. He sat in the dark after she fell asleep and thought about his own daughter, who died in a colony disaster 3 years ago. Dot had not been able to save her, but maybe he could save this one. Morning came too quickly, and Marcus walked to the trial grounds with the unfamiliar weapons, feeling their weight. Draxthur was waiting with his soldiers, and half the colony had come to watch. The commander smiled and gestured to the arena, where something large moved in the shadows. Marcus stepped forward and heard Sarah whisper good luck behind him. The Krithix emerged, and it was bigger than the reports suggested, with eyes that tracked him like he was already dead. Marcus gripped his weapons and thought about Lisa's watching from the crowd. Then the creature charged, and Marcus discovered exactly how hard it was to stay alive when facing something designed to kill. Part 3. Trials of the Worthy. The Krithix moved faster than Marcus expected, and he barely rolled aside as its claws gouged the ground where he had been standing. The creature was built like a tank with 6 legs, giving it stability that made it nearly impossible to knock down. Marcus circled right, keeping the spear ready, while his mind worked through the problem like it was a broken machine he needed to fix. The Volrene soldiers were laughing because they expected him to charge in like a warrior and die quickly, but Marcus was an engineer, not a fighter, and engineers solved problems by understanding how systems worked. 8. Watched the Krithix move and noticed it favored its front right leg, slightly like an old injury that never healed properly. Marcus also saw that the creature's armor plating had gaps at the joints where the legs connected to its body. The arena had rocks and debris scattered around from previous trials, and threw a rock at the Krithix's face, making it flinch, then threw another from a different angle. The creature got frustrated and charged again, but Marcus was already moving, using the arena's layout to his advantage. He led the Krithix toward a cluster of large rocks where its size would work against it. When the creature tried to follow him through the narrow space, it had to turn sideways, exposing its vulnerable left side. Marcus threw his spear with all his strength, aiming for the joint gap he had spotted. The weapon sank deep, and the Krithix screamed. which was a sound Marcus hoped to never hear again, but the creature was not dead, just angry, and now it was coming for him with murder in its eyes. Marcus had only the curved blade left, and he knew one hit from those venomous claws would end him so. He did something the Valrine considered dishonorable. Used the environment as a weapon by climbing onto the rocks, where the Krithix could not easily follow. The creature tried to reach him, and Marcus waited until it stretched up, exposing its throat. He jumped down, driving the blade into the soft tissue. Under the jaw and holding on while the Krithix thrashed it took nearly a minute for the creature to die, and Marcus was thrown clear at the end, landing hard. Enough to crack a rib. He lay on the ground, gasping, while the crowd went silent. Then Draxer started clapping slowly, and the sound echoed across the arena. The commander said Marcus had won, but called his tactics clever cowardice rather than true warrior skill. Marcus struggled to his feet and said he did not care what Draxer called it, because the goal was to protect Lisa's, not to impress Valrine. Warrior Sarah rushed over to check his injuries while Lisa's broke free from Dr. Yuki and ran to Marcus. Wrapping herself around his legs, Marcus picked her up despite the pain in his ribs because she was crying and needed to know he was okay. Draxler announced the second trial would be held the next day, and it would test wisdom, not strength. That night, Dr. Yuki wrapped Marcus's ribs and gave him pain medication while lecturing him about being more careful. Marcus said he would be more careful right after he finished doing impossible things to save a child. Lise stayed close to him all evening, and Marcus taught her some human card games using pictures since she was still learning the language. She laughed when she won, and the sound made all the pain worth it. The next morning brought the trial of wisdom, where Marcus sat before a council of Valrine elders with Draxter presiding. They presented him with an ancient Valrine philosophical puzzle about honor, duty, and tradition. Warrior was ordered by his clan leader to kill an innocent child from an enemy clan to prevent a future war. The warrior knew the child was innocent and killing them was wrong, but his duty to his clan demanded obedience. The question was, what should the warrior do and why? Marcus listened to the puzzle and thought about his own losses and the choices he had made. He said the warrior should refuse the order, even if it cost him everything, including his life and his honor in the eyes of his clan. The elders looked skeptical and asked why a warrior should abandon duty and bring shame to his family. Marcus took a deep breath and told them about his wife and daughter who died in a colony disaster 3 years ago. He said he was the settlement's chief engineer, and it was his job to maintain the life support systems, but he had been too slow to catch a critical failure in the oxygen recyclers. Failed in the residential section. 12 people died, including his family, and Marcus had to live with knowing his failure killed them. He said true honor was not following orders or maintaining tradition. True honor was protecting the innocent, even when you failed, even when it destroyed you, even when everyone said you were wrong. Marcus said that warrior should refuse to kill the child and accept whatever punishment came, because living with that child's blood on his hands would be worse than death. He said honor without compassion was just cruelty wearing a fancy name. The chamber was silent when he finished, and Marcus saw several elders looking at him with something that might have been respectful. Expression was unreadable, but he declared that Marcus had passed. The second trial, an old female Valrine named Kassira approached Marcus afterward while the others were leaving. She had gray scales and scars that spoke of a long military career, but her eyes were sad. Kassira said quietly that she had a daughter once who was sent to the breeding program. She said her daughter died in childbirth at age 15, trying to produce an heir for a clan that saw her as Livisto. Kassira said she had been fighting the practice for years, but tradition was a heavy chain that most of her people refused to break. She told Marcus the final trial would be combat against her because Valrine law required a guardian to prove they could defend their child against the child's own kin. Marcus asked if there was any way to avoid killing her, and Kassira smiled sadly. She said they would figure something out, but he needed to make it look real, or Draxer would claim he forfeited. Then she told him something that made his blood run coldless was not just any child, but the last genetic heir of a rival clan that had been systematically eliminated through the breeding program. Marriage arrangement was never about politics, it was about erasing a bloodline that threatened certain powerful familia scara, and gathering evidence for years, but could not act without proof that would convince the Galactic Council. said if Marcus could force Draxter to reveal the truth during their combat, then they might have a chance. That night Marcus held Lisa's while she slept and thought about how one small child had become the center of something much bigger. He thought about all the other children trapped in the breeding program and how saving one might help save them all. The morning of the final trial came with storm clouds gathering over New Meridian. Marcus walked to the arena knowing this was the moment that would decide everything. Kassir was waiting in full combat armor with weapons that looked like they had killed many people. Draxter stood beside the arena with his soldiers, and Marcus could see the commander was expecting to finally take Lisa's home. The colony had gathered to watch, and Marcus could see Sarah holding Lisa's, who was trying not to cry. Marcus stepped into the arena, and Kassira looked at him with eyes that said she was sorry for what she was about to do. Then she attacked, and Marcus discovered that an old Volrene warrior was still faster and stronger than any human could hope to be. He blocked her first strike, but the impact nearly broke his arm. Kassira whispered that he needed to make her angry enough to accuse Draxter publicly, so Marcus started talking loudly about how the breeding program was not about tradition but about murder. He said powerful clans were using it to eliminate rivals while pretending to honor ancient customs. Kassira fought harder, pushing Marcus back, and he could barely defend himself. But he kept talking, kept accusing, kept pushing until Kassira suddenly turned toward Draxthorsh, shouted that Marcus was right and she had proof that the commander was part of the UND. Conspiracy. Kassir said she had evidence showing dozens of clans eliminated through arranged marriages. That resulted in convenient deaths. Draxthor's expression shifted from confident to furious, and that was when Marcus knew they had him. The commander ordered his soldiers to seize all three of them, saying human law meant nothing but the colonies. Recording devices had captured everything, and Sarah was already transmitting it to the Galactic Council. The Volrene soldiers moved forward with weapons drawn, and colonists grabbed whatever they could to defend Marcus, and Kassirless broke free from Sarah and ran toward Marcus, crying his name. Then Kassira did something that shocked everyone. She removed her military insignia and dropped her weapons. In the sudden silence, she knelt before Marcus and said in perfect human English that she had failed her people. She asked if she could stay with him and help raise Lisa's because she had no child and no clan left. Before Marcus could answer, Draxter screamed for his soldiers to kill all three of them. The weapons came up and Marcus grabbed Lisa's, pulling her behind him, while Kassira moved to shield them both. This was how humanity died, Marcus thought, by standing between children and those who would harm them. Part 4. When mothers choose. The colonists moved before the Volrene soldiers could fire. Sarah led the charge, throwing herself between Marcus and the weapons, with 20 other humans following her example. Formed a living wall around Marcus, Kassira, and Lisa's, using their own bodies as shields. The Volrene soldiers hesitated, because firing now meant killing unarmed civilians who were protecting their own. Draxter screamed orders, but several of his warriors lowered their weapons, looking uncomfortable with what they were being told to do. Soldier, a younger Volrene male, dropped his rifle completely and said this was not what he joined the military to do. He said he signed up to protect the Empire, not to murder children and the humans trying to save them. Draxter pulled his own weapon and pointed it at the deserter, calling him a traitor, but more soldiers were lowering their guns, and Marcus could see the commander losing control of his troops. Was when the sky lit up with the arrival of 3 Galactic Council enforcement ships dropping out of faster than light travel. Sarah had transmitted everything to the Council, including Kassira's evidence, and they had responded faster than anyone expected. Voice boomed across the colony in multiple languages, demanding that all parties stand down and prepare for Council authority. Draxter looked at the ships above, and his face went through several emotions before settling on cold fury. Said this changed nothing because the Council moved slowly, and by the time they finished investigating, he would have friends in high places who would bury the evidence. Marcus stood up still, holding Lisa's, and said that was the problem with people like Draxthor. They thought everyone could be bought or intimidated, but some people actually believed in doing the right thing. The Council ships landed, and soldiers poured out, not just from one species, but from 6 different civilizations. Galactic judge named Vex Thora came forward, and she was an old Volrene female who looked at Draxter like He was something nasty on her boot, she said. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was being arrested for conspiracy to commit. Genasuda Droxter laughed and said she had no proof that would stand up in council court. Vexthora smiled and said they had Kassira's testimony, plus the live recording of him ordering the murder of civilians, plus financial records showing payments to eliminate rival clan. She said they also had something else, and gestured to her soldiers who were bringing forward 3 more Volrene females. These were survivors of the breeding program who Kassira had been hiding and protecting for years. They told their stories in front of the gathered crowd, speaking about torture and forced pregnancies and watching. Their friends one female named Lyra said she had been 14 when she was married to a man 3 times her age. She said he beat her when she could not conceive quickly enough, and the clan leaders said this was normal. Another named Sira had scars covering her back from punishment when she tried to escape. The third, named Nyx, had lost 2 children to stillbirth because she was too young to safely carry them. Their words fell like hammers on the crowd, and even some of Draxter's own soldiers looked sick. The commander tried to say these females were lying, but Vexthera cut him off. She said the medical records confirmed everything, and the council had already begun arresting his co-conspirators across 4 systems. Draxter was taken into custody, still screaming threats, while his soldiers were disarmed and detained for questioning. The young soldier, who had dropped his weapon first, approached Marcus and knelt. He said in broken human language that he was sorry for his people's crimes and asked if there was anything he could do to help. Marcus was surprised but told him to stand up because humans did not make people kneel. We said the soldier did the right thing by refusing an evil order, and that took more courage than following comments. Kassira stood beside Marcus, and Lisa's came out from behind them, looking at all the gathered people. Little girl said something in Volrene, and Kassira translated that Lisa's wanted to know if she was safe. Now Marcus picked her up and said yes, she was safe, and no one would ever take her. Awalis looked at Kassira and asked if the old warrior was going to stay with him. Kassira's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Marcus, waiting for his answer. Marcus thought about his empty house and his dead family, and how this strange alien warrior had risked everything to save one child. He said of course Kassira could stay if she wanted to, because they were a family now, even if they did not look like one Asira made. A sound that was half laugh and half sob as she reached out to touch Lys's head. Gently she said in her language something that Marcus did not understand, but the meaning was clear from her expression. She was thanking him for giving her a reason to keep living. Vexthora approached them and said the council needed to conduct interviews and process paperwork. She told Marcus that his guardianship of Lys's would be officially recognized and Kassira would be granted refugee status, the judge said. What Marcus did had sparked something across the galaxy. She said other species were now looking at their own traditions and questioning whether some practices should be preserved or abandoned. Marcus said he just wanted to keep one child safe, but if that helped others, then he was glad. Vexthera smiled and said humanity had a gift for seeing individuals when others saw only groups or traditions. She said that was why humans were becoming influential beyond their small numbers, because they made people remember that every being mattered. The council soldiers left after 3 days of investigation, taking prisoners and evidence with them. Colonies slowly returned to normal, though now they had several Volrene refugees living among them. Kassira moved into Marcus's house, taking the guest room, and immediately starting to help with Lys's course. She knew things about Volrene children that Dr. Yuki could only guess at, like dietary needs and sleep patterns. Marcus watched Kassira teach Lys's traditional Volrene combat forms, but modified to be about self-defense and discipline, not aggression. He saw how gentle Kassira was with the child and how Lys's responded by calling her something that meant honored mother in Volrene. At night, Marcus and Kassira would sit together after Lys's fell asleep and talk about their lost familia. Skara told him about her daughter who loved music and wanted to be a teacher before the breeding program took her. She said her daughter's name was Lisa's, and that was why she had fought so hard to save this child. Marcus told her about his wife, who was a botanist, and his daughter who wanted to be an engineer like him. He said losing them had broken something in him that he thought could never be fixed. Kassira said maybe it was not about fixing what was broken, but about building something new from the pieces. They sat in comfortable silence, and Marcus realized he had not felt this peaceful in years. Sarah visited often, and brought reports about how the story of Lys's rescue was spreading across human colonies, she said. Marcus had become something of a hero, though he hated that description. Marcus said he was not a hero, just a man who could not walk away from a child in need. Sarah laughed and said that was exactly what made humans special. One evening a month after the trials, Marcus was teaching Lys's how to use a welding torch under careful supervision. Cassir was cooking dinner using both human and Volrine recipes to create something neither species had tasted before, though. House smelled like food and sounded like Lys's laughter and felt like home. Marcus looked at his strange, unusual family and thought about how far they had all come. A human engineer who lost everything, Valrine warrior who defied her entire civilization, and a child who survived horrors that would have destroyed adults. They were broken pieces that had somehow fit together into something whole. That night, as Marcus tucked Lys's into bed, she looked up at him with complete trust. She said in clear human language that she loved him and loved Cassira and was happy. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he kissed her forehead and said he loved her too. In the other room, Cassira was cleaning up and humming up Valrine lullaby that her own daughter had loved. Marcus stood in the doorway watching her and realized that somehow, against all odds, they had built a family from tragedy. Galaxy was a big, dangerous place, full of traditions that hurt people and systems that protected the powerful. But here in this small house on a frontier colony, three beings from different worlds had found something simple and truth. They had found each other, and that was enough. Part 5. The new family. 6 months passed, and New Meridian colony changed in ways nobody expected. The Volrine refugees who stayed brought skills and knowledge that helped improve farming and engineering systems. More importantly, they brought stories about their homeworld, its problems, which made humans understand that every civilization struggled with its dark traditions. Marcus's house became the center of this small community where humans and Valrine gathered to share meals and ideas. Lys grew taller and more confident, speaking both human language and Volrine fluently. She spent mornings in Marcus's workshop, learning engineering, and afternoons training with Cassira, learning discipline and combat forms. Watched his adopted daughter become something unique, a bridge between two species that had barely interacted before. She had a human father's curiosity and a Volrine mother's strength combined with a child's natural ability to see past difference. Cassir integrated into colony life better than anyone expected. She worked with the security team teaching hand-to-hand combat and with Dr. Yuki studying Volrine medicine. But her most important work was with the other refugees, helping them heal from trauma and adjust to a life where they could make their own choices. Marcus noticed how Cassira smiled more often now, and how the sadness in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something like peace. One morning, Marcus was fixing a water pump when Cassira brought him coffee and sat down beside him. She said she wanted to talk about something important, and Marcus set down his tools to give her his full attention. Cassira said she had been talking with the other Volrine females about creating a formal support network for survivors of the breeding program. She said there were probably thousands of females across the Empire who needed help but had nowhere to go. Marcus asked what she needed from him, and Cassira smiled. She said she needed nothing because he had already given her everything by showing her that family was not about blood or tradition. She just wanted him to know that his actions had started something bigger than saving one child. That evening, New Meridian received a message from the Galactic Council. Judge Vexthera contacted them directly to inform Marcus that the breeding program had been declared illegal across all Volrine territories. She said the council had established safe houses on 12 planets where females could seek refuge. More than 500 Volrine women had already escaped in just 6 months, Vexthera said. This was happening because one human refused to look away when he saw injustice. Marcus told her he did not do it to change the galaxy. He did it to save one child. The judge laughed and said that was how most important changes started, with one person deciding that one life mattered. She said that the council wanted to award Marcus a medal for humanitarian service, but he declined. He said medals did not help anyone, and if the council wanted to honor him, they should focus on helping the refugees. Vexer said that was exactly the kind of response she expected from him. The colony decided to hold a celebration for Lys's official Adoption, which was a human tradition combined with a Valrine honor ceremony, Sarah organized everything, turning the main square into a festival ground with food from multiple worlds. Dr. Yuki helped create a medical record that officially listed Marcus as Lys's guardian under both human and council. Lacasira worked with the other Valrine to prepare traditional ceremonies that had been modified to celebrate family by choice instead of blood. The day of the celebration arrived with clear skies and warm weather. Humans and Valrine gathered together, eating strange food combinations and trying to teach each other their dances. Marcus wore his best clothes, which were still just work clothes that Sarah had forced him to cleanly as wore. A dress that combined human and Valrine designs with colors from both cultures. Kasira wore formal Valrine armor that she had modified to remove all military insignia, replacing them with symbols of family and protection. The ceremony began with Marcus standing before the gathered crowd, holding Lys's hand. He spoke about finding her in the wreckage of her mother's ship and how that moment changed his life. He said Lys's taught him that families could be built from broken pieces and that love did not require matching species. Then Kasira spoke in Valrine with Sarah translating for the humans, as she said she had lost her daughter years ago and thought she would die alone and full of regret. But Lys's and Marcus showed her that mothers could be chosen, not just born. She said every day with them was a gift she never expected to receive. Lys stood between her two parents, looking small but brave. She said in clear words that she remembered her birth mother and would always honor her sacrifice, but she also loved Marcus and Kasira, who gave her a home where she was safe and valued. She said she was lucky because she had 3 mothers, counting the one who died to save her. The crowd was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. And soon, everyone joined, and the young Valrine soldier who had defected was there, and he approached with several others from Draxler's former unit. They knelt before Lys's and pledged to protect her generation from the mistakes of their generation. Marcus told them to stand because humans did not believe in kneeling, but he appreciated their commitment. Celebration continued into the evening with music and food and stories shared between species. Marcus found himself talking with Vexthera, who had traveled from council headquarters to attend. She said quietly that what he built here was important beyond just one family. She said humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy was not technology or military strength, it was their stubborn insistence that every individual life had value and that compassion was strength, not weakness. Marcus said he was just one person trying to do the right thing. Vexthera smiled and said that was exactly her point. She said civilizations changed when enough individuals decided to be like him. Later that night, after the guests left, Marcus stood on his porch watching the stars. Kasira joined him carrying 2 cups of tea, and they sat together in comfortable silence. She said she never imagined her life would turn out like this. Marcus said the same, and they both laughed. Quietly came outside, wrapped in a blanket, and climbed into Marcus's lap. She said she had been thinking about her birth mother and asked if it was okay to miss someone and be happy at the same time. Marcus said yes, absolutely, and that her mother would be proud of the person she was becoming. Lee nodded and then asked if they could work on her engineering project. Tomoro Kasira said only after combat training. And Lys's groaned dramatically, making both adults smile. They sat together on the porch, this unlikely family built from tragedy and choice. A human engineer who learned to love again, Valrine warrior who found redemption in protecting instead of fighting, and a child who survived darkness to become a symbol of hope. The galaxy turned above them, full of millions of worlds and billions of beings. Somewhere out there, other children were being saved because people saw what happened on New Meridian, and other families were being built from broken pieces because someone decided tradition was not more important than kindness. Marcus did not think of himself as a hero or a revolutionary. He was just a father doing his best to raise a child who needed him. But Kasira told him once that the most powerful act of rebellion was choosing love when the world expected hate. She said every time he tucked Lys's in at night, he was proving that compassion could cross any divide. Marcus thought maybe she was right, but mostly he just focused on the small moments, teaching Lys's to weld properly, watching Kasira teach her defensive forms, sharing meals together and laughing at jokes that did not quite translate between languages. These were the things that mattered, not medals or recognition or changing the galaxy, just 3 people from different worlds choosing to be a Family A reporter. From a human news service visited the next week wanting to do a story about Marcus She. Asked him what humanity brought to the galaxy that was special. Marcus thought about it for a moment, then gestured to Lisa's, who was arguing with Kassira about homework. He said humanity brought the crazy idea that family was not about blood or species or following traditions just because they existed. He said family was about who stayed when things got hard, who fought for you, who asked if they could stay. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The reporter asked if he thought that was enough to make a difference. Marcus looked at the 3 Valrine refugees who now ran a successful restaurant in the colony. He looked at the young Valrine soldier who now taught peaceful conflict resolution. He looked at his daughter, who was both human and Valrine, and completely herself. He said one person making one choice might not seem like enough, but one choice inspired another and another until eventually traditions that seemed unchangeable started to crack. The reporter left with her story, and Marcus went back to his normal life. Normal now meant a Valrine warrior making breakfast while lecturing about proper nutrition. Normal meant a child who spoke 2 languages and belonged to 2 cultures. Normal meant a house that was full of life and love and laughter. That evening, Marcus tucked Lisa's into bed and she asked him if he was happy. He said yes, more than he thought possibly. Said good, because she was happy too, and so was Kassira, even though she tried to hide it sometimes. Marcus smiled and kissed her forehead and turned off the lighting. The hallway he found Kassira waiting, and she looked at him with an expression he was learning to read. She said thank you, though they both knew she said it almost every day. Marcus said she did not need to thank him for something he wanted to. Kassira said she knew, but she would keep saying it anyway because some things deserved to be said. Repeatedly, they walked to the living room and sat together reviewing supply reports and colony business. It was domestic and normal, and Marcus realized that was exactly what they all needed. Not grand adventures or dramatic rescues, just the quiet peace of a family living their lives outside the stars shone down on New Meridian Colony, where humans and Valrine were building something new together inside small house. 3 beings from different worlds proved that the most powerful force in the galaxy was not technology or weapons. It was the choice to love across every boundary and the courage to protect that love against any threat. Marcus looked at his family, his strange, wonderful, impossible family, and knew he would not change a single thing. They were exactly what they needed to be, broken pieces that fit together perfectly. Family built on choice and held together by love, and that was more than enough.